Well, today is a very special day because I have the one and only Tommy Rosen with me and with us here on the Element Q podcast. If you don't know Tommy is a pioneer in the recovery movement, a spiritual teacher, and the founder and creator of Recovery 2.0. Welcome to the Element Q podcast. I'm your host, TJ Woodward, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for this empowering journey. Each week, we shine a light on the authors, thought leaders, therapists, coaches, and healers of all types who are making a difference in the LGBTQ plus community. Together, we honor those who came before us, the courageous and resilient trailblazers who stood for our rights and recognition. Their strength laid the foundation we stand on today. Here, we celebrate their legacy by diving into the stories, insights, and tools that inspire gentleness, healing, and transformation. So get ready to be uplifted and empowered. This is the Element Q podcast. Welcome, Tommy. So grateful you're here.
Thank you, TJ. I am so delighted to connect with you.
I just love being in conversation with you. I have so much respect for your work over the years. There's so much synchronicity in what we do. The topic, of course, for this particular podcast is LGBTQ plus healing. And I know you have your own unique story with your relationship to the community. So I'm wondering if we can start with that.
Let's jump right in. Thank you so much. And I'm so grateful when I saw that this podcast was coming out. I think I wrote you a text, being a heterosexual male. I think I wrote you something like, I guess you're not going to have me on your podcast. And I'm so disappointed about that because I have so much interaction and connectivity with LGBTQ plus, and I kind of always have.
Yeah.
And so thank you for the opportunity to connect in this way. So I think what you're referring to has to do with my father. And the way I tell the story is that I was born in 1967. And sometime in that year, between when I was born and literally a year later, my father, who had been married to my mother for 7 years and had had 2 children, myself and my sister, he came out and he told her that he was gay. Now, I want to couch this in the time period. And really, we'll all consider that this is the 60s. My mother came very much from a wealthy family, sort of socialite family. The concept of homosexuality was not welcome.
Right.
I think it was probably to a great extent made fun of at that time. And the idea of my mother having married, now I'm going to use a very bad word here, which was the word my grandfather used for my father. So the idea that my mother married a faggot, which was how my family referred to that at the time, to refer to my father, at least my grandfather did, was unthinkable.
Yeah.
It was unimaginable. So my father coming out wasn't the idea that we have now, where someone consciously and beautifully, or they need to communicate with their family, and hopefully there's good possibility of a loving outcome.
Right.
Impossible. And there's so much to say about it, but I did say to my father in later years, many years later, why did you come out at that way in that time? And he said to me that he came out because he was desperate to not live in that lie. And he was hoping that somebody, his wife, my mom, could understand. He was looking for understanding. And he even called it, he was in a low moment. And the idea was that a depression led him to the desire to disclose this thing about himself, which was so fundamental and so important for him to disclose, but it was not met in any kind of positive way. And to a great extent, he was very much ostracized.
Yeah. And I mean, to put this into historical context, of course, is so important. I was born 2 years before you in 1965. And in that era, The DSM, basically the psychologists and psychiatrists of the time still considered it a mental illness. No one was really coming out, or very few people were. And at that time, people were raiding gay bars and publishing the names of people in the newspapers so that they would lose their job, et cetera. So for him to be able to reach that, it's interesting to me too, that there was the low point that created this desire for him to come out, or this need. And I look at that for each of us as our journey. I know sometimes in my lowest points have been the point of transformation. We see that, of course, with people with addiction, right? We get to a point where staying where we're at becomes more painful than taking this huge risk. And again, like you said, now obviously it's still a risk for a lot of people, but a very, very different construct at that time.
Yes. Oh my God.
Yeah. Something complete. It's basically coming out, and in that context, I'm coming out as a deviant, right? That's the way it was really viewed. And so the courage to that with that is remarkable. I'm curious. I mean, you were obviously, an infant at that time, so you don't actually remember that moment, I'm guessing, but I'm wondering how that unfolded and how that showed up in your life in terms of what happened in the relationship. And I can only imagine there might be some shame there within the family, and I'd love to hear more about what happened next.
Well, shame's a good place to go.
Yeah.
It's important to give a little background emotionally on my mother, Ellen. So my father's name was David, and my mother's name was Ellen. And my father fell in love. He would classify himself ultimately as gay, but he was bisexual, had attraction to women, and he really, really honestly fell in love with my mother and always had wanted to have children. And that was there.
Yeah.
For my mom, my mother had a lot of trouble with her father. In fact, in her first marriage before my father, she got married against her father's will, ran away, had a child at 18 years old, found herself as a single divorced mother at 19 years old.
Wow.
She met my father maybe 4 or 5 years later after that. So my mother, looking very much to prove herself to her father, to prove herself to the world, to show up in a way which was going to validate her existence. And here she had done something that was unthinkable, which was to marry a man who was homosexual.
Yeah.
Not only did she not succeed in proving herself to her family and her peer group, but there was a tremendous amount of shame there, misunderstanding. I think her initial reaction was, I don't understand. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
How is that even possible?
Right.
Just an absolute disbelief. And so there's that background there. My father and mother, I never saw them together except one time, which was at my college graduation. It's the first time I ever saw them in the same place. I even have a picture holding them both and like pointing to them. Like, can you believe this? And they just had plugged into each other and hurt each other in the worst ways. Yeah. My father needed something from her. She needed something from him. Neither one was to deliver that need. They came in with guns loaded into that relationship, and it didn't work out. It just didn't play out well. And so as a result, I think my mother probably at some point in my childhood had mentioned or hit upon the fact that my father was different than other men, but I don't remember her ever disclosing that to me. When my father told me that he was gay, I believe that I was 14, and I was in the passenger seat of a car, and he was driving, and it was so funny the way he did it. He looked at me and he said, I want to talk to you about something serious. And I already knew. I don't know how I knew. I just knew that he was gay.
Yeah.
And I wasn't caught up in it. I don't know why, TJ. I honestly wish I could answer for you so that other people could learn from my wonderful wisdom or the thing that I had done to find peace with this. It never ever was a problem for me. Honest to God, not at all. So my father looks across at me from the driving a car and he says, "You know, I swing both ways." That's how he said it. And I looked at him and I said, "Yeah, okay, Dad." And he's like, "Yeah, I don't think you understand. I don't think you get it." He goes, I'm with men and women." And I was like, "Yeah, it's okay."
Yeah.
I'm literally 14 years old. I'm like telling my dad, "It's okay." He really didn't think for the longest time that I understood because my reaction was so nonplussed.
Yeah.
And because he had been in so much shame of himself for so long that for someone to treat him in any other way than that, or to be sad or confused or to ask lots of questions or to be angry or whatever you might, however a son might react to his father. But TJ, I never ever felt anything for my father except tremendous, tremendous love for him in this regard. I just didn't care. And I don't know why, but that's just what it was.
It's so interesting to me because when I think about how generationally quickly something can change, and you and I are essentially in the same generation, and in our generation, we came in with a really different awareness, I believe, around, gay, bi, the whole thing, right? And I'm thinking about my grandmother who had a gay brother, and she was born in 1908, I think, or sometime in the early 1900s, and it was never talked about. Uncles, two uncles, it was his partner. As a matter of fact, after he passed away, our other uncle stayed in the family, but no one would have said gay. But our generation was like, why aren't we talking about this? So I think a lot of times we talk about generational trauma, right? Which of course is a real thing, but there's also generational consciousness. And for whatever reason, our generation came in to like usher in a different era with this. So in a way, I'm not at all surprised. I remember when my nephew, I had a t-shirt, he was born in 2003, and I had a t-shirt that said something like legalize gay. And he was like 9 years old or 8 years old. He said, "Uncle TJ, what does that shirt mean?" And I said, "Oh, it just in some states, it's still not legal to be gay." And he looked really perplexed and he said, "That's weird." Right. So we come in a different consciousness, which of course, then we can help heal like our parents' generation in so many ways. And we see this happening. I'm curious though, if we start to kind of shift to your own journey, wonderful that you were very accepting of that. And at the same time, your parents splitting and the shame that you were experiencing, because I know in my household, there was so much happening, but no one was talking about it. And shame was just a felt sense. It was like I was swimming in it. And I remember just shutting down at a really early age, even though none of this was super conscious. So I'm curious what the impact of this was on you, how it related to your own journey, maybe even your addiction and recovery, and your seeking spirituality, which I'm fascinated by all of it.
There's a split going on in our family, obviously, at that point. There's a previous, maybe it's interesting to tell the previous story very, very briefly. So the backstory on all of this with my mother's father. So I expressed that my mother and her father had a very hard time.
Yeah.
And there was an aspect of the dynamic of her relationship with him that she wanted to prove herself to him. She wanted to be approved of by him. She wanted to be accepted, in a certain way, but she was also extremely angry with him. And part of the reason of that buried anger is because he divorced my grandmother and about a year later married her sister.
Oh, wow.
And that was in 1954.
Wow.
Now that put a massive rift in our family. So you've got these intergenerational, like I'm going to call them like boo-boos,
Yeah.
boo-boos in our family that ended up planting seeds for a lot of pain as people tried to work these things out. My mother's way of trying to work this stuff out was to be angry, bitter, and tremendously resentful, and then to marry a man who ended up being gay, and all of these things. So there's a piece of the backstory. In my home, we had two telephone lines, 879-9454, 879-9433. 9433 was the only person who had that phone number was my father.
Hmm.
And the reason that we had that phone line was because my mother, two things. One, never wanted to pick up the phone when it was him. So she always knew if that phone rang, it was for us and it was our father.
Mm.
And occasionally she liked to listen in on our conversations. So that was known that 9433, there could only be one thing happening on that line. That's my father and one of us. Okay. So that's how this played out. I mean, it's a good metaphor for everything. The shame you speak of, to me, I'm going to describe it as the itch you can never scratch.
Yeah.
It's something that is beneath the surface, a sense that something's wrong. If someone asks you, what's wrong? Tell me, honey, what's the matter? And they really want to know. If you're honest, you'll say, I don't know. Something's wrong. There's something wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know what it is. I don't know how to describe it to you. But there's a feeling of dread, or there's a feeling of something that's not being expressed or addressed. Something's wrong. And I grew up in a home where I felt that in a low-grade way all the time. So not panic. I'm not having panic attacks. I'm not in that level of anxiety. More, it's like a low-grade, something's just always wrong here, and it's weird. And we all don't know what to do about it. What I ended up doing about it was essentially starting with cannabis and basically, I basically smoked my way through that feeling for about a decade, and a lot of other heavy drug use ensued, and I became a full-on drug addict. It makes perfect sense to me.
Yes.
It makes perfect sense to me that anybody, and of course, gender and sexual orientation have nothing to do with this. Anybody with a shame, a seed of shame deep in that you can't figure out, even if it's not your own shame, but it's your family.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just that seed is going to bloom, and that needs to be dealt with in some way, shape, or form at some point.
Yes. And our stories are so similar because the way you're describing shame, I describe it as feeling like I'm swimming in oatmeal. But I love the way that you describe there's something not right here, but I can't really articulate what it is. That was certainly my experience growing up in my house. I remember just thinking what people were saying, what people were doing, and then this energy I felt were three totally different things. And my mom would look at the ceiling and say, Tom, if you're having an affair, I don't want to know. And I remember thinking, we all know. It's so clear. And when they separated, I listed all the people who he'd had an affair with. And she said, how did you know? And I remember at 14 saying, how could you not know? Right. So there was that. And, in my model conscious recovery, I identify the root causes of addiction as unresolved trauma, spiritual disconnection, and toxic shame. And that shame became so toxic for me. And like you said, I had to find a way out. And when someone handed me weed, it brought relief. And of course, we've heard maybe 1,000 times it worked until it didn't, right? It did help with the shame, or at least it numbed the shame. But as you said so perfectly at the end, at some point, I had to address it. And I would love to tell you that I got sober and addressed my shame. But the truth is I got sober and just stayed sober for a while. And then there was this point in my recovery around 18 months sober where I found myself suicidal because all the shame was there. It was like coming to the surface, and all that trauma I had been running from, the decisions I had made, the core ideas I had about myself, all that came to the surface. And the reason I'm telling that story is what saved me from that, and what ultimately led me on this journey inward, was meeting a spiritual teacher, a mentor who took me on a journey of rediscovering my true nature and pretty much unlearning everything I had believed about myself other than this fundamental spiritual truth. And I know you and I there's so much synchronicity in our recovery path, and then ultimately as the teachers we've become. So I would love to explore that. Your recovery, the role of spirituality. I want to hear all about it because I know it's a great journey.
Thank you so much. I wanted to mention for anybody in your listenership who's hearing this that my father once said to me incorrectly, he said, I think that part of the reason you became addicted to drugs is because of my sexuality.
Yeah.
And I got really angry at him when he said that. I said, that really pisses me off.
Yeah.
And no, Dad, I don't feel that way, and I never felt that way. But if you want to know the truth, and I was coming from anger here in the moment, I said, if you want to know the truth, I'm angry because the thing about your sexual orientation that bothers me is that you have never been able to accept it for yourself.
Yeah.
And that has been a problem for me, uncomfortable for me.
Right.
And so recovery, how do we recover from all this? I love what you said. I love so much what you said, and I love your journey and staying sober for a while, that staying abstinent for a while, and coming to a place where things present themselves to you that are ready to be worked out.
Right.
And what a sacred journey this is. And we're so fortunate to have our teachers. I don't know anyone who doesn't have a teacher on this path, multiple teachers in different stages. For me, this gets worked out first through abstinence. I say to people all the time, we all know that drugs and alcohol aren't the core problem,
Right.
even though they may have become very real problems in your life. So those problems have to be put aside before you can get to the actual problems that were sort of there originally. So you get abstinent from the drugs, from alcohol, or whatever your addictive behavior of choice was.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go out and you live life, and hopefully you're working some form of program or beginning to, meaning you're exposing yourself to community,
Yeah.
and to spiritual principles, things like honesty, very simple. Honesty, I'm going to work on compassion. I'm going to work on forgiveness. I'm going to try to work out my anger, work out my inner violence. I'm going to try to work these things out. I wouldn't know to do this if I didn't have a book and a teacher and some writings to do and some things to listen to. And so you get a little bit on a path. For me, that was critical. And that was the 12 steps. And the 12 steps, when I earnestly worked them with a sponsor, who was gay, by the way, my first sponsor, Rick, God bless him. I mean, I don't know how he put up with me. Every other word was no or why. Why? I was a 2-year-old, maybe 3. I'll give myself a 3-year-old child in early recovery. And that is real. And everything was no and why. Why do I have to do this? Why me? Why don't they have to do this? Why doesn't everybody have to do it? Why is this being forced on me? No, I won't do it. I won't do it. This poor man hung in there with me through 1,000 cups of coffee, thousands of meetings, endless hours of reading out of the book and reviewing my patterns, reviewing my choices, and building slowly a deeper relationship with spirit. Mm-hmm. And that all happened for me. And 9 months into that journey of really committing to that work. And again, I want to say it doesn't have to be that work for everybody, but it has been my experience that if it's not going to be the 12 steps, you're going to have to find something that helps you be honest and helps you work out your resentments and your angst. For me, it was the 12 steps. 9 months into that journey, I woke up and I remember this feeling of a realization that I hadn't been thinking about drugs and alcohol. Mm. That was the realization. Like, I couldn't remember the last time I had sincerely thought about using. Like, was it yesterday? Was it last week? A month ago? When did this transformation happen? It wasn't that I was getting better at fending off cravings, it's that there were none. And all of a sudden, I had two feelings I remember, and I wrote about it. One feeling was like a tremendous excitement, a tremendous joy. And the other feeling was a big fear.
Mm.
Now, I wanted this thing. I wanted life. And I was scared that I was going to lose it. I was scared that I was going to go back to the way it had been. And I started to work. I really, really started to work on this. Working with other people, practicing yoga, breath work, and meditation has been huge. Just, I can't express. To embody recovery with those practices has been a game changer for me. Plus, I had so much tension in my mind and body that I needed something to work it out aside from just speaking.
Yeah.
So I'm a big, big fan of talk therapy, and I'm a big fan of communication. And I'm a big fan of working out the stuck energy on a different level through yoga practices primarily.
That is such a beautiful description because that is so my experience, but I relate to it more from when I quit smoking when I was 2 years sober. I remember waking up one day and thought, it occurred to me that I didn't think about a cigarette the day before. And that was just absolutely mind-blowing because for me, drugs and alcohol, I was one of those people who, for whatever reason, never had cravings from the day I got sober. And I just feel so fortunate about that. I remember one time, maybe 3 years sober, I smelled alcohol, and for just a moment I craved it. But for whatever reason, that was lifted from me. But cigarettes was a completely different journey because I wanted to quit smoking for 2 years, and I finally quit. And I only quit because my sponsee did. And I thought, well, this doesn't look good. If my sponsee can do it, I should do it, right? So that began that journey. But I love what you're saying about embodiment because I completely agree that when we look at it, and there's an Indian proverb that says we're a house with 4 rooms: physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. And I had done the physical sobriety and I'd done a lot of the intellectual. And the intellectual was kind of trying to figure out patterns, looking at patterns. 12 steps can be brilliant with that. And then there's this deeper dive that seems to happen for us as either we stay sober a while or maybe a life event happens that causes us to move more deeply inward. And that embodiment to me is everything, right? Because when I work with clients now, a lot of treatment focuses on teaching and teaching principles or teaching tools. And I think those can be really wonderful. And if a client can actually have a shift energetically or experientially, because in the most simplistic form, and I know this is very simplistic, but I like simple. We've been running from the experience of now for so long, and so much of it is under the surface in the unconscious that if a person can just be present with themselves for 2 minutes or 3 minutes and they didn't run away, we don't have to process that intellectually. They experience it. And I agree that yoga, meditation, sound healing, there are other ways, but those are such a quick way to be present with self. And I watch it happen with clients. I see them have the awareness, oh, I could feel that I've been running from sometimes for decades. And the simple truth is I can be present with it, but my mind has told me I can't be.
I love it so much. What I'm reflecting on is I don't find in this day and age there's anything simple about presence.
Right.
I think that we're all so great and have been trained into unpresence.
Yeah.
That, if you can really, really just take 3 minutes and become good at that,
Yeah.
regular with that, and become present for 3 minutes a few times a day, I think that's going to be an antidote to some of our challenges today with I sometimes say to people, do you think we're building our capacity for concentration or losing our capacity for concentration
Right.
in society today, generally speaking?
Yeah.
And everyone's like, I think we're losing our ability to focus and concentrate.
Yeah.
And I think that's not a good thing, since the most wonderful things come from focus and concentration. So I love that you brought up presence and yes, these practices. I don't think it's something that just happens for us. I think we have to work for it.
Yeah.
And I think that's advanced recovery.
Well, and it's interesting because I'm thinking about the wonderful Pema Chodron, Buddhist teacher, who and Tommy, I'm sure that people weren't saying it, but I heard meditation teachers saying the goal of meditation is to quiet the mind. I don't know if they were really saying that or if it was just the lens that I could hear through, but I was one of those people who would say, I can't meditate because I can't quiet my mind. And then Pema Chodron says, it's about observing. And obviously she's not the only one, but it was the that I heard it when I needed to hear it. Those moments when we have the meditation that's blissful, maybe we want more of that, but it's equally as useful to sit in meditation when it's brutal. And when she said that, she's a New Yorker. I love her energy. And when she said that, I thought, wow, I've been running from, which is the, Buddhist 101, that suffering comes from clinging and averting. I want more of what I believe feels good and less of what is difficult, not what is good and what is bad. And when I heard that, I thought, oh, I can practice that. And there was something so powerful in simply observing the thought, which then created some space, because the next natural question was, well, if I'm not my thoughts, who or what am I? And that's when we tap into that true presence of being the ultimate observer of life. And then suddenly everything shifted. It felt like instantaneously. But of course, it took me about 2 decades to get there. And my friend, Dr. Sue Morter, says life is difficult and a challenge until it isn't. And I love that, right? Because that until it isn't moment did take about 20 years of practice. But then it was like, oh, it is simple, even though my mind complicated it. The other thing I wanted to touch on, and I don't know if this is true, but it might be true, and it seems true, that we get more information in 24 hours in our phones now than a person in the late 1800s received in a year. Yeah. And when I think about that, that's only 150 years ago, roughly, right? Or less. The change in how we are living on earth is dramatically different, and we're inundated with all this information. And so the spiritual practice is how to be with that and not be in the reactive impulse. Yeah. I know there's a lot there, but I'm wondering your thoughts about that.
Oh my God. Well, thank you. I'm just going to call myself out and just say, I've watched my own behavior change.
Yeah.
In 10 years.
Yeah.
I really have seen it and I've reflected upon it. And I don't want to hide from it, because I see that these devices and the way that I'm interacting with them has had an effect on my experience of the world. Yeah. And I remember a sort of a luminary, a very public figure that I was with, spending some time at a festival. This is 10 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe. Where are we? No, it's like 10 years ago. And this person was videoing herself in the middle of our day. I was like, what are you doing? And this person was like, well, my fan base wants to know what I'm up to.
Yeah.
And I literally, I didn't have my governor on that day. I just said, why?
Yeah.
Why would anyone care what you're up to versus anybody else or themselves? It was the strangest phenomenon to me. Flash forward 10 years.
Yeah.
I'm out there like, hey, what's up, everybody? Tommy Rosen here. I'm like, oh my God.
Yes.
Wait a minute. And when I go and I have this experience, when I go to Yosemite National Park, I get into the national park, which is like a sacred place for me, any national park, any beautiful natural environment. But when I get there, I have this feeling of sort of almost guilt. Mm. Like, I know the answer is here.
Yeah.
I know the stillness is here. I still believe in the tree. I still believe in the plant, the flower, the bird, the bee. I still believe in the river. I still believe in the rocks. I still believe these things are important and centering and core to our existence. I believe this is the real medicine. And I just think if we are going to survive and thrive, or ever find a way to thrive again, we're going to have, I believe, a return to nature. It's not going further into virtual reality, going further into artificial intelligence, going further into the digital realm. I think the digital realm is important, and it's a realm, but it's a realm that doesn't need to replace the realm that we've been in of this gorgeous, beautiful earth. I still believe in it, TJ. I don't know what to tell you, man.
I'm with you, Tommy, and I love it because you and I are both people who also use technology to spread our message. So it's this interesting paradoxical conversation. And for me, it's like if I don't remember the truth of who I am, the spiritual being that I am, which is it's so connected with it's one with nature. It's not connected, it's not disconnected or connected. We are one with that nature. And that nature, if you look at nature, it just has an energy, a vibration. And for me, it's like I have to be in that enough to remember who I truly am. And the technology, it kind of reminds me of thought, right? Like if I think I am my thoughts and my mind or my intellect is in charge, I suffer. But when I use the mind or the intellect as a delivery system for spirit, it can be harnessed in that way. And that's how I see technology, maybe AI, maybe a virtual reality, all of it, but anchoring first in spirit and remembering deeply who I am. Then the rest of that can become a fun way to play in the infinite possibilities of our technology. And I mean, I think that's something that you and I know are dedicated to, right? It's being in the midst of this. And it reminds me of, I don't often quote Jesus, but Jesus is said to have said to be in this world, but not of it. That was 2,000 years ago, right? The same, or maybe even more importantly now, be in the world, to be in the world, but anchored in who we truly are.
That's it. Amen is what I'll say to that right there. And all the major teachings that I'm experiencing, whether that's Eastern spirituality, a teaching like the Bhagavad Gita,
Yeah.
the Yoga Sutras, the Bible, the Quran, the Talmud,
Yeah.
all the major scripts, what they in the Sikhs call the Siddhi Guru Granth Sahib, their holy book. All these truths are coming to the surface from all these different paths, all these different geographies, all these different time periods, but they're all saying essentially the same thing. In the East, they might say, ground yourself in yoga, and then go into the world and act. In the West, they might say, be in the world, but not of it.
Right.
Jesus, one of my favorite teachings ever, and of course, it didn't originate with him, but it came popularized through him.
Yep.
Behold, the kingdom of heaven is within.
That's right.
And I say to people, especially Christian people who have a problem sometimes with yoga or meditation, and I say, what do you think Jesus meant by, behold, the kingdom of heaven is within? And we'll get into that conversation. And, for me, it's a call inward. I think it's a great directive for everybody, every human being. There's a spirit in all of us. And to connect with that spirit is, I think, the greatest achievement that a person can have in this life.
That's
and
right.
To live from that is where it all happens. And
yes, I'll say amen to that. I mean, because to live from that, listen to that language, everyone, to live from that, to live as that, to know that's who we are, to be that in the world is a profoundly different way of living. And I know, Tommy, you and I feel even more synchronicity now after this conversation. Believe it or not, we're actually at the end, maybe even slightly over. Not that we have to stick to that, but I just feel like we just got started. I appreciate you. I've watched you from afar for years, and more recently, we've had a chance to collaborate. And I just always feel grateful to be in this deep conversation of this vibration of love is who we are. And when we are that in the world, everything changes. So it can be complicated, but it can also be simple. So, Tommy, I'm wondering if there's anything you want to say to anyone watching or listening right now in closing.
Yeah. I want to say, from the work that I do involving addiction and that you do, TJ, as well, I just want to say these are extraordinary times. And I mean that. I don't mean it as lip service. I'm wanting everyone to understand that what's required right now to be centered and calm is more than used to be required.
Mm.
These are very, very challenging moments right now. And I don't mean for some, I mean for all. It's just a moment in time that's asking a lot of the people who are alive on the planet at this time. And so if you're feeling it and you're under that weight, get around community. That's number one. Conscious community, people that are working on it, people that are wanting to be better, wanting to be calm, wanting to be sober, wanting to be healthy, and work your practices. And you get those from TJ. He's putting it out every day. And so that's it. Don't despair, but recognize that these are hard times and they require hard measures and consistency for us to rise up to the challenge of these times.
Wow. Thank you, Tommy. I so appreciate you. And thank you for sharing your gifts with our audience and with the world. And I just am so grateful for you, for our collaboration. Peace and blessings, everyone. Until next time. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Element Q podcast. It's an honor to walk this path of healing and transformation with you. Remember, the courage and resilience of those who came before us live on in each of us. Let's continue to carry their legacy forward as we support one another in creating a world filled with love, gentleness, and empowerment. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we're building a brighter future, one story at a time. Until next time, I'm TJ Woodward, and this has been the Element Q podcast.